Life did not go quite to plan for Johnny Donaldson after he graduated high school. He had enrolled at Hartwick College in upstate New York, but had struggled academically. He had to withdraw from school in December of 1977 because of failing grades. He was given the option to reapply to the school once he felt he was ready to handle his course load, and Johnny appeared to have every intention of returning to Hartwick in the future. In the meantime, 20-year-old Johnny was living with his parents, paying them $15 a week in rent in his childhood home on Lover's Lane in the small town of Harvard, Massachusetts. He was working at the Sheraton Hotel in the neighboring town of Waxborough. That job did not work out exactly as planned either. Johnny was originally hired to work at the front desk, but he was demoted to working in the kitchen as a dishwasher. Johnny made the best of the situation and began making friends with some of his coworkers in the kitchen. Most of Johnny's longtime friends were away at school, and some of his new work friends were still in high school. Johnny gave a ride to one such coworker, 17-year-old Kurt Allen, after working the night shift at the hotel on April 5th, 1979. They left the hotel around 12:45 or 1 a.m. on April 6th. They drove to Hillcrest Avenue, where Kurt lived, but instead of going to his house, they went to the home of two brothers who also worked at the hotel with them. The four of them hung out in the driveway, listening to music, drinking some beers, and smoking cigarettes. Finding somewhere to socialize like this after work was fairly routine for the employees of the hotel. The two brothers went back inside around 2 a.m., but Johnny and Kurt lingered outside for another hour or so. Around 3:15 a.m., Johnny dropped Kurt off at his house just down the street and then drove home. When he arrived at the house on Lover's Lane, he did not immediately go inside. His routine usually involved sitting outside in his orange Pinto, listening to the radio and having some quiet time to himself to unwind before he went inside to go to bed. It also gave him the opportunity to smoke one last cigarette, as his mother did not allow smoking inside the house. Shortly before 4 a.m., Ronald Robbins, a patrolman with the Harvard Police Department, was driving down Still River Road, which runs parallel to Lover's Lane, when he saw Johnny's headlights through the trees. He drove over and had a short but civil conversation with Johnny. He asked what Johnny was doing outside so late, and Johnny explained that he had worked late and was just finishing a cigarette before heading inside his house for the night. Officer Robbins left to go back out on patrol, not knowing that he would be the last person to see Johnny alive. Johnny was one of 4 children. He had 2 sisters and a brother. The last time all 4 of them were together was at Christmas of 1978. On Christmas Eve, they all went bowling together. Johnny's brother, Jim, was the sibling who was closest to Johnny in age. In the spring of 1979, Jim was also temporarily living with his parents, sharing a room with Johnny, at least in theory. In practice, Jim often spent the night at his girlfriend's place. He had done so on the night of April 5th. Around 6:45 a.m. on April 6th, Jim returned to the house on Lover's Lane to get ready for work. As his car turned into the driveway, he saw Johnny's Pinto parked as normal, but he noticed damage on its sides and a crack in the passenger side window. His initial thought was that there must have been some sort of accident that had damaged the car. He could tell Johnny was sitting in the car and assumed he had fallen asleep. As he got closer to the car, Jim began feeling as though something were wrong. When he got a better look at his brother, he saw that Johnny's hands were in his lap, a burnt-out cigarette between his fingers. At first glance, Jim still thought Johnny must have been hurt in some sort of accident. Then he noticed the trail of blood coming down Johnny's face and how discolored his skin was. Jim then realized that Johnny was dead. He ran inside to get his father, who came outside and reached the same terrible conclusion before calling police. Johnny had been killed by a single gunshot to the head. A bullet had gone through his left cheek and pierced his brainstem. The medical examiner believed Johnny had been killed instantly. Johnny had not turned his head, making it appear that he had not heard the shot or anyone approaching. He may have fallen asleep after speaking to Officer Robbins. His time of death was placed between 4 and 5:30 a.m. The bullet that killed Johnny had been shot by a .22 caliber rifle. Shell casings from a .22 caliber rifle were also found between the car and a stone wall at the bottom of the driveway. They had been shot from a distance of approximately 60 feet. Shell casings from a .22 were also found in a backyard shooting range on Hillcrest Drive, the street where Johnny had been hanging out with his friends a few hours before his death, but they were not a match to the shell casings from the crime scene. .22 caliber shell casings that were a match to the ones from the scene were found at several locations not far from Lover's Lane. The matching shell casings were found at a gas station near the hotel where Johnny worked, a nearby liquor store whose front window had been shot through, and near several parked cars approximately 2 miles away from the crime scene. Police conducted numerous interviews, but no witnesses came forward, and the case stalled. Then, nearly 5 years after Johnny was killed, an arrest was finally made in the case, but it ultimately created more confusion rather than provide any answers. In February of 1984, Ronald Robbins, the patrolman who had briefly spoken to Johnny shortly before he was killed, was arrested and charged with being an accessory after the fact in the murder. Ronald had left the Harvard Police Department and was serving in the Air Force Reserve at the time. Ronald had been arrested based on a statement from a witness. The witness claimed that Ronald had told him that he knew who had killed Johnny. However, the witness was facing a drug charge at the time and was only willing to work with police in connection to Johnny's case if his case were dropped. When his charge was not dropped, he stopped cooperating. According to a local media report, the witness later told state police that he had never heard Ronald say anything about the murder of Johnny Donaldson. At a hearing in May of 1984, Assistant District Attorney Brian J. Buckley acknowledged that the witness had changed his story and that there was insufficient evidence against Ronald Robbins. The presiding judge ruled that there was no evidence of Ronald's guilt. Ronald later sued the town of Harvard and members of the police department for being wrongly arrested and charged. He reportedly received a $40,000 settlement. The case then truly went cold, despite the best efforts of the Donaldson family. Over the years, the case would be reassigned to numerous detectives, and occasionally they would investigate a potential suspect, but nothing ultimately came from these efforts. When Johnny's family was able to meet with investigators in person, they would receive sympathy, but no concrete plans for resolving the case. In 2005, Johnny's brother Jim was allowed to see some of the files in the case. He believes that some potential leads have not been thoroughly investigated. An informant for the Drug Enforcement Administration was working at the Sheraton where Johnny worked. The informant had reported that 2 of Johnny's friends from work were upset with him because he owed them money. In a later interview with the Boston Globe, one of these friends denied this, saying that Johnny had not owed either of them money. However, if the DEA were interested in what was going on at the Sheraton, it implies that there was suspected drug-related activity at the hotel. This means that Johnny could have seen or overheard things that could have incriminated others, potentially giving them a motive to kill him. However, Johnny's siblings have also come to believe that there is a chance Johnny's death may not have been a cold-blooded murder. The spent shell casings found at various nearby locations indicate to them that some teenagers may have been joyriding around town that night, firing a gun at vacant buildings and empty cars for fun. When they fired the gun near Johnny's car, their actions were obviously wildly irresponsible, but they may not have necessarily been malicious. Lover's Lane was fairly remote, so they may have gone there to shoot in perceived safety. Or perhaps they may have been friends of Johnny's who knew his routine of hanging out in his car, smoking a cigarette before he went inside for the night, and fired at his car as a joke to scare him, not realizing they had actually shot him. As time has gone on, this possibility does seem more remote to them. Harvard is and was a small town, so there were only so many young people around. The joyriding scenario implies that there were most likely a group of them driving around town, meaning that there are multiple people who could have come forward to tell police what happened that night. Now that more than 45 years have gone by without anyone doing so, it is harder for Johnny's sister to believe that multiple people could keep such a secret for so long. Unless a witness finally does come forward, and soon, given the fact that everyone who could have been involved with the case grows older as the case grows colder, Johnny's case may never be solved. One of Johnny's sisters, Susan Donaldson James, went on to become a reporter, working for ABC News and NBC News during her career. She is currently working on a memoir detailing her family's experiences trying to cope with Johnny's murder. She has written about the widespread effects unsolved crimes have on the lives of the loved ones of the victims. She advocates for the rights of these families and for better communication from law enforcement to them. In a 2024 opinion piece for the Boston Globe, she wrote, "The hardest thing for human beings is to deal with the unknown. Whenever there is trauma, we want to have a narrative, a sense of what happened and why. For victims' families, it's an unfinished story and complicates their grieving. Better communication from law enforcement would go a long way to help families deal with decades of uncertainty and pain and give them a narrative and some sort of peace."